Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we'll be updating the power rankings for Big Brother Canada 10 following week 3. And, this is sort of a weird thing going from the second half of the Kyle HOH to now the beginning of the Gino HOH. And it'll be interesting to sort of go through how things have changed quite a bit. Admittedly, there has been quite a bit of shifting in terms of the power rankings, though. Although my actual opinions of these people's games haven't changed too much at the end of the day, certainly not as much from week 1 to week 2, but let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting at the list at number 14, we have the boot from this previous week, we have Stephanie, and I always saw Stephanie as being a relatively early boot. She was definitely someone that talked a lot about showmances, and through that I could see her potentially being targeted due to being in a showmance. However, that didn't seem to happen that much. I mean, sort of the way in which she became this early boot is sort of crazy, where she was put up by her own ally, initially as a pawn, but he sort of went back and forth on targeting her. Ultimately, by the time Moose won the veto, and then Kyle put up Josh as the replacement nominee, obviously Kyle was targeting Josh and wanted him to go home, but it's more so through the house being so opposed to Kyle by that point that they basically turned into an anti-Kyle vote and sent Stephanie out the resort as a result. So at the end of the day, she didn't do that much to actually be evicted. The fact that she even ended up on the block in the first place was sort of a weird circumstance thanks to Kyle. And obviously her being sent out of the door is less due to her own misdoing and more so due to people opposing Kyle. But at the end of the day, I feel like she was largely expendable in the game. She didn't really have that many allies to where people were relatively fine with sending Stephanie out the door. So it's not like her going out the door really harmed anyone's gains, which in turn made them more acceptable to the idea of sending her out as a result. So at the end of the day, I can't reward her too highly. I mean, she was pretty passive in the game. It seemed like she was largely there for a showmance, and while she showed some awareness and while you feel a little bad for her in the sense of her being put up on the block and then ultimately being targeted, two things that largely happened outside of her control, at the end of the day, she wasn't that active in the game. She didn't really have too many allies. And again, the fact that people were willing to vote her out to oppose Kyle, as opposed to keeping around Stephanie to help their own games, is a big knock, so I have her here at number 14. And with that, we are now moving to the 13 people still in the game, and like I said, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win. But at number 13, we have someone that's currently on the block and is the most likely to be targeted this week. We have Jessica. Now, again, I don't think it's a guarantee Jessica goes home per se, however, it's not looking too great for the time being. Now, I will give them some credit for keeping themselves out the block in previous weeks, as well as sort of being in the opposition to Kyle, and with Gino winning HOH and wanting a somewhat stable HOH after the craziness that Kyle presented, Jessica does seem to emerge as this common house target and someone who doesn't really harm too many people's gains by sending out the door. Mind you, Jessica is not a guarantee to go home, as we saw Gino consider putting up Tanisha as a potential replacement nominee after Marty won the veto. And if Tanisha does win, go up on the block, then there is a possibility that Jessica could stay with the house being relatively divided. There's also Betty as a potential option to go up. However, I feel like at the end of the day, Jessica is the most likely to be sent out the door, as obviously if they go up against Betty, then Jessica probably goes home. And even with Tanisha going on the block, while that would be a closer vote, I feel like people may be more inclined to send Jessica out the door as it would expose them less. And especially with people like Herman, who really stuck himself out in this previous vote with sending Stephanie out the door, I could see Herman really trying to go back to a more consensus pick or quote unquote consensus pick to make it less likely that he'll upset a large portion of the house that wants to get out the Kyle side of things. So because of that, it's not looking great for Jessica, and because of that, I have them here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and this is sort of a weird person to talk about because on one hand, they are likely going to end up on the block this week, especially if certain things happen. But on the other hand, they're actually pretty likely to stay this week, which is sort of weird because I don't think they're that great of a player. And here we have Betty. And again, I don't think Betty has played particularly well either. Mind you, she did avoid the block. I did say last week that she was likely to end up on the block. Mind you, that was recorded before a lot of the movement post-veto happened that resulted in Kyle putting up Josh instead. So I had to give Betty some credit for staying off the block. She did quite a bit of campaign to make sure she wasn't going to end up in that position. But here, she's likely going to end up as the replacement nominee. Mind you, I think she's likely going to stay over Jessica. as I feel like people don't really have much reason to get rid of Betty. She's sort of a lot of permanent pawn potential going on there. And again, there's not much reason to really get rid of her at this stage. However, the main reason I have her this low is because I don't think she's winning the game. I feel like she is someone that doesn't really have much respect from a lot of people, and she doesn't seem to be involved in any of the core power structures. I mean, obviously, that's not great at the end of the day. And while she's likely going to stay over Jessica if she ends up on the block, I feel like there's a good chance she could end up on the block in the future, as she's always going to be brought up as a potential pawn moving forward. And it's really only a matter of time before people will probably decide, you know what, it's not worth keeping her around. She's got to go. So it's not looking great for Betty at this stage. And again, I feel like she hasn't handled being on the block particularly well. So it'll be interesting to see how she handles this situation if Gino decides to put up her. But for now, I decided to leave her here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. And I kind of debated on this person's placement, as I feel like they were the target of a lot of people coming into this week. And they got pretty lucky with the HOH results. But here we have Kyle. And again, it's sort of an amazing fall from grace from Kyle, to where he literally goes from being one of the most well-positioned people in the house before winning HOH to then getting HOH in what was supposed to be a pretty safe week, and then just completely bombing it, just completely turning a lot of the house against him, to the point to where he was a common house target coming to the week. And he gets very lucky with the HOH results, to where Gino wins HOH. Again, one of the few people that wasn't going to put him at all. I mean, he probably wouldn't have gone up either if it was Jacey-Lynne. And even if someone put him up, there's a good chance he could have won the veto anyway. So I don't think it was entirely a guarantee he was going to go home. But he did get very lucky with the HOH result, with Gino winning it. Obviously, that puts him in a pretty good position. As again, I feel like despite him turning a lot of the house against him, he still has some allies in the house. He has Gino, he has Jacey-Lynne. And I feel like he has the ability to win const moving forward, to where he could survive some rounds. But at the end of the day, he is still going to be a target moving forward. And who knows what's going to happen if he wins HOH again. I mean, he could very well overplay again, or maybe he could learn from his mistakes. But I will also admit that he hasn't really done much since Gino won HOH to really get himself off the target of a lot of people, as we even see people try to convince Gino to put up Kyle as a possible replacement nominee. Mind you, that's probably not going to go through at this point, although, again, with my previous track record, it's very possible stuff could change in the next day with the veto meeting coming around the corner, so we'll have to see what happens with that. But again, it's not looking great for Kyle beyond this week, as well as, again, he's going to have to rely either on winning competitions to get forward, or rely on people like Gino or Jacey-Lynne to win HOH moving forward. Now, that's certainly possible, as I feel like those are two of the more capable competitors in competitions, but still not a great position to be in, so because of that, I had to leave him here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this person, as I feel like they were pretty well positioned before the previous vote, but with the vote results coming in, it seems like they've been getting a lot of blame for the recent boot, and here we have Marty. And again, I felt like Marty was always someone that's going to be targeted sooner rather than later, as even though he was in this group of Kyle and Gino, he was seen as the most threatening of those people and the most likely to be targeted in the near future of those people. And we see that sort of play out, where Gino wins HOH and he sort of blames Marty for turning on him and voting against Kyle in voting out Stephanie. And we see that through the nominations, where Gino puts up Marty with the possibility of him going home. Now, mind you, I don't think Gino actually wanted Marty to go home. He more so put him up as a way of signaling to the house that he's not going to tolerate deception or people turning on him. And it was more to set an example of Marty. Now, obviously, Marty ends up winning the veto, so he's able to take himself off. However, it's still not a great position for him moving forward, as I feel like, again, he's someone who's probably going to be targeted moving forward. And even if it's not in the near future, he's probably someone who's going to be targeted towards the end game anyway. And it's not looking great for Marty. Mind you, I think he's been doing a bit more in terms of laying the groundwork and securing his position. However, I feel like it's not going to be enough, and I feel like he is still going to be targeted moving forward. So because of that, I feel like 10 is a decent spot for him. Now we're moving on to number 9, and similar to Marty, I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this person. And I feel like a lot of the reason this person is this low is because there is a decent shot that could end up on the block this week. And here we have Tanisha. And again, I always saw Tanisha as playing a pretty similar game to Summer. I feel like she has played a pretty good game up to this point, with the exception being that she's been a bit more passive, and I feel like she is the bigger target of the two. However, it seems like now that Marty has won the veto, Gino is heavily considering putting Tanisha up as the replacement nominee. And the reason I have her this low is because I feel like if Tanisha does go up against Jessica, there is actually a chance that the house could be divided again, similar to what we saw last week. And through that, that puts Tanisha in a pretty precarious position. Mind you, I think she could definitely have people on her side. She'll definitely have people like Summer and Helena on her side coming into the vote. However, Herman is definitely not secure, as Herman is someone who really wants to get back in with the guys after turning on them at the previous vote. Herman is someone that wants to play the middle, and I could see him turning on Tanisha as a way of reasserting his position in the middle to try to gain trust with the Kyle and Gino side of things. So I think that's something that could definitely put Tanisha in a pretty bad spot if she ends up on the block. Mind you, I think she would still have the votes to stay, but still not a guarantee. And it's that lack of certainty that makes me not want to put her too high. And even beyond that, I feel like she's more likely to be targeted over Summer, as she is inherently the bigger target. People have been talking about turning on her at some point. So because of that, I have to leave her here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8. And this is sort of a weird person to talk about, as I actually think this person is more likely to be targeted sooner than Tanisha. However, they're certainly not being targeted this week. And here we have Jacey-Lynne. And Jacey-Lynne, again, is another person that's sort of in a weird spot to where they're technically in the minority now, sort of with the Kyle and Gino side. She's still seen as pretty close to Gino, and there's a lot of women in the house that don't trust her, don't really see her as being part of their group. And I feel like Jacey-Lynne could be targeted in the near future as a result. Also, I feel like she hasn't been playing super well at the end of the day. I feel like she hasn't managed a lot of her relationships super well. She hasn't really done much to integrate herself into the new majority that's been solidifying. And I feel like she's been largely on the wrong side of things. I mean, she voted to keep Stephanie in the game, sort of fulfilling Kyle's wishes. And I feel like it's unlikely she'll be turning anytime soon against that. And it's unclear what she'll do if Kyle ends up going out before her. I feel like if that's the case, then she'll be largely floating in the game. No one will have much of a reason to keep her around. So because of that, I can't have her too high. I feel like she probably will be targeted sooner than Tanisha. However, it's the fact that Tanisha is going on the block this week in a position to where she could be in some danger that makes me have her above Tanisha. However, if Tanisha does survive this week, I would have Tanisha above Jacey-Lynne. Now we're moving on to number 7, and this is a weird person to talk about, as again, I feel like this person has the potential to be targeted if certain people win HOH. However, it seems like they've been largely off the radar up to this point. And here we have Moose. And obviously Moose was in a very interesting spot last week to where Kyle was targeting him. He put him up only for him to win the veto and obviously take himself off. And I feel like through the chaos that Kyle created in the fact that much of the house has turned against Kyle, I feel like that has taken some attention away from Moose. Mind you, I still don't think he's in the best spot in the world. I wouldn't be surprised if he was targeted in the future. However, we have now seen that Moose is capable of winning competitions. And again, he's kind of been laying low in recent days. I feel like he hasn't really done much to blow up his game. And I feel like as long as Kyle remains in the game, as long as he remains a prime house target, I feel like that's definitely something that will benefit Moose. Mind you, if Kyle does win HOH again, we could definitely see him try to target Moose again, so we'll have to see what happens. And admittedly, it's still a weird spot to have Moose this high on the list, as he was a target not too long ago, and I still think he probably will be a target moving forward, as he's not really in any power structure really. However, it's the fact that the Kyle thing has sort of given him some buff room to breathe. That is the reason I have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I've been a bit disappointed with this person, as I felt like they were in a prime position to take control of the game in the last week. However, they just have not capitalized on this. And here we have Helena. And a big reason I had her this high last week was because I felt like with the Kyle situation sort of opening up the game for people like her, Summer, Tanisha that were not in the core power structure to really take control. And I feel like Helena was definitely in the best position to be in the best position in the house, with her potentially joining this new group of misfits while still having an in with a lot of the people that were in the initial power structure. However, I feel like that hasn't really materialized. Now, she is technically in the middle of the house, as there are definitely people that have solid relationships with her, but I think people have pointed out that she has not capitalized on this. She has not really solidified a new power structure, and a big reason why people voted to save Josh last week is more so due to anti-Kyle sentiment, rather than people actually coming together to form a new power structure after the Savage Seven seemed to fall apart. And I feel like now that things are kind of settling again, Helena's not really in the best spot. She doesn't really have a number two that can really propel her through the end of the game. Mind you, I think a big reason that I have her this high is because I feel like no one's really targeting her soon. People haven't really talked about going after Helena anytime soon. However, she hasn't really built much for herself and she's just sort of floating in the game. And I feel like she doesn't really have many close allies at this point that want to take her to the end in a position where I feel like she really could have solidified something for herself. And I feel like the fact that she hasn't really done that for herself while things seem to be settling around her is a big knock to her game. But it's the fact that she hasn't really been targeted that much and the fact that she still technically has an in with both groups. Mind you, she's not really in a great position with either of them, but I feel like it's enough to leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and honestly, I'm not feeling the greatest about putting this person this high, but honestly, with the state the house is in, I feel like this is a fitting spot for them. And here we have Kevin, and I don't know what to really make of Kevin's game at this point. Mind you, I think he's done relatively well to this point. However, I feel like he really has sort of wasted certain opportunities, particularly with forming this new power structure that is centered around these misfits that were originally outside the core power structure. I also feel like he's someone who could be quite a bit in danger soon with like Kyle potentially going out the door. I feel like keeping Kyle in the house is someone that could definitely keep the target off Kevin's back. I also don't like his positioning between Summer and Tanisha, to where they're obviously a duo and obviously Kevin's the third of that. And obviously you have people like Herman who at this point don't trust him too much at the end of the day. However, I feel like he's done relatively well to this point, and I feel like the people we already talked about are people who either are in a worse position than him or people who are more likely to be targeted sooner than him. So I still feel like Kevin still has some potential in the game. And if he does enter the new power structure, then I feel like he could do relatively well. He still has decent relationships with people like Kyle and Marty to a degree. He still has people like Summer and Tanisha that could help him out to a degree. However, it's the fact that this power structure that hasn't really solidified around Kevin that has really sort of harmed his game. And I feel like there's still potential for him to be targeted. Mind you, less so than the people we already talked about, but still a concern for me. And because of that, he's here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4. And similar to Kevin, I feel kind of weird about putting this person this high. I mean, they were just on the block. They were put on the block as a target. Mind you, they did survive. I didn't feel like they did too much to survive. And I feel like they haven't been playing too actively for much of the game. But I feel like now that things have sort of settled a bit, I feel like they are in a somewhat decent position. And here we have Josh. And Josh is interesting to talk about because obviously Kyle put him up as the replacement nominee last week after Moose won the veto. And obviously he was the target in that situation. Mind you, he definitely had the votes to stay. How largely due to anti-Kyle sentiment, people want to defy the HOH. Mind you, I don't think Josh really did that much to get the numbers to stay. It was more so people just being mad at Kyle and people wanting to use this power vacuum as an opportunity to build something for themselves. And I feel like at the end of the day, there wasn't really something that came together. It was more so just 9 people coming together for different reasons without really coordinating and having some distrust and division amongst each other, but were simply united by the goal of defying the Kyle HOH to save Josh. And again, I've talked about in the past how I don't think they've been playing that actively in the game. And I feel like there's an argument that could be like where Moose is on the list to where they have been able to fly under the radar. However, I feel like now things are sort of benefiting Josh a bit better. I feel like unlike Moose, he's less likely to be targeted moving forward. And I think there are more opportunities for Josh to get into a power structure similar to Kevin that to make something that could really benefit its game moving forward. I mean, he did survive the block as the target at the end of the day, and he did get by far the majority of the votes to stay. Again, even though he didn't really do that much himself. And I feel like he has been playing a bit more, not a ton, but still a bit more. And I feel like he is less likely to be targeted moving forward than Moose. He sort of used his opportunity to fly under the radar to not really make himself too big of a target. So I can't really fault him too much for that. However, I can see the argument for him being a bit lower on the list. But honestly, I feel like a lot of this middle of the list are people that are relatively close to each other anyway. So because of that, I have Josh here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3. And I believe we have the 3 main power players at this point, or the people that are widely considered the power players. However, at number 3, we have the person who I think is definitely fared the worst in the past week. And here we have Herman. And I feel like Herman was definitely put in a bad spot last week after Kyle put up Josh as a replacement nominee, as it really forced him to pick a side between the Kyle and Gino side of things versus the Misfit side of things. He definitely wanted to play the middle of that. And I feel like the way he handled it was sort of mixed to where he kind of sketched out certain groups. I mean, we see that with Kevin, who approached him for an alliance, and I feel like Herman kind of sketched him out to a certain extent to where Kevin doesn't fully trust him. And obviously, he does end up voting with the Misfits to save Josh, but in doing so, definitely gets on the bad side of Gino and Kyle, who definitely saw him as part of their own. And we see Herman do quite a bit of damage control to try to get back with that group to a certain extent. He tried to frame Kevin for the rogue vote to save Josh, but obviously with so many people voting to save Josh, it ultimately resulted in Herman being implicated in that. And it's sort of not of a great spot for Herman to be in. I mean, he's probably going to try to do his best to rebuild his bonds with Kyle and Gino this week, but in doing so, may not get the full trust of the Misfit side of things, even though that side hasn't fully solidified yet. And I feel like it's definitely putting Herman in a difficult spot to where he could still be targeted moving forward. People may not fully trust him. Mind you, I don't think he's going up this week. I mean, Gino definitely seems to trust him enough to not put him up. However, I could definitely see people start to see Herman as a threat moving forward. They could be seeing through his act of him trying to play the middle, and through that he could be targeted as a result. And it's just not a great spot for him to be in. Obviously, again, a lot of that was through this past vote this week where he was forced to pick a side, and through that, that kind of weakened his position. Mind you, I still think Herman definitely has what it takes to recover, but for right now, with his current game position, I feel like 3 is about as high as I can put him. Now we're moving on to number 2, and again, this is another interesting person to talk about, as technically their position did weaken a bit, but not too much, and it's actually the current HOH. We have Gino, and again, I feel like Gino has played this HOH somewhat well. I mean, he doesn't really seem to be making a lot of big moves, and I don't think he's really doing much to help Kyle in the game that much. Mind you, I feel like a lot of that is to sort of stabilize the house a bit after a pretty crazy HOH. And I feel like he is trying to take out a consensus house target in order to build some goodwill between him and his side of the house. Mind you, I think Kyle's still going to be targeted. And we even see that with people approaching Gino to put up Kyle as a house target. Although I don't think Gino is particularly likely to do that at this stage. I mean, we also see him really just try to maintain the strong position that he's had. And that's mainly the thing that's keeping Gino as high, is the fact that he has kept this strong position despite Kyle sort of blowing up his own game, and through that sort of putting him in a pretty bad spot. I mean, obviously the fact that he won HOH was pretty impressive on his part. Mind you, he didn't really play game that first night of HOH, as there was a party and he insisted on there being no gameplay. Afterwards, he did have a bunch of one-on-one beatings that led to his initial nominations of him putting up Marty along with Jessica, and I could understand his move to put up Marty, although I feel like that definitely puts Marty in a bit of a tough spot moving forward. And obviously, Marty is someone who is already likely to be targeted. And obviously, by doing that, he's making Marty more likely to be targeted moving forward. Although I don't think he was actually planning to target Marty this week particularly. And I feel like Gino has done what he can to maintain his position, not cause too much waves, and really preserve his own game. Although I don't really think he's playing that actively at the end of the day. I still feel like while he does have the strong position, he's not really playing much of a game. He's just more so benefiting from being an all-around good guy, which is good for his long-term prospects, but I feel like it's not really something I can commend too much. So because of that, I have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I think is the most likely to win right now is Summer. And honestly, I don't think Summer's playing that great of a game either. Really, I don't think anyone really came out this week looking particularly great. And I still think there are issues with Summer's game, particularly her inability to solidify this power structure around the outsiders. It seems like her and her group hasn't really gotten their act together at this point, which is definitely an issue on her end. However, I still feel like she is playing pretty actively for the most part. I feel like she is less likely to be targeted than Tanisha or some other people in her power structure. And again, I feel like she is someone who has done enough to impress me while doing the least amount wrong within the last week. Again, while she didn't really do that great this past week, I feel like she doesn't have issues that Herman has, where Herman really sketched some people out by trying to play the middle and then ultimately being forced to pick a side. And I feel like she is playing more actively than Gino, in the sense that obviously she's been playing more actively. She's been trying to get something together, although she hasn't been very successful in that. while still not being likely to be targeted in the near future. And again, I can see people disagreeing with this. I feel like there aren't really a lot of great picks to go with, but I feel like Summer has the least issues that I have after this past week. And because of that, I have her here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And like I said, I'll be back next Monday to update these power rankings again. I'm also covering other shows like Survivor 42 as well as Australian Survivor. Those shows are going pretty well, although Australian Survivor is ending pretty soon. So obviously, if you want some endgame content for that, be sure to check that out. Obviously, this show is going on as usual. So like I said, stay tuned for all that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.